To my YouTube channel where we discuss international relations and international security, and of course matters that borders around global politics and global governance. Make sure that at the end of this video you like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's going to be a very engaging platform to equip you with necessary knowledge and skills that you need as far as international relations and global politics is concerned. Today we're going to be looking at human rights and security. Human rights and security. Is there any correlation or a nexus between human rights and security, whether at the national level or at the international level? What are international legal provisions for promoting human rights and human security as far as the global system is concerned? And so before we begin to interrogate human rights and security, it is important to demystify the concept of human rights and of course the concept of security. Then we'll be able to establish the nexus between human rights and security. What is human rights? The concept of human rights is a concept that is peculiar in the field of law, in the field of international law, in the field of political science, and so on and so forth. And so human rights as a concept is multidimensional in nature. Human rights means different things to different people. But of course, it is not just the right of living organisms. We are saying the right of humans. Remember that humans are species of animals, what you may want to call, or what the scientists will call Homo sapien, right? And as Homo sapiens, as Homo politicus, human beings enjoy certain kind of privileges, whether within their state or within the international system, as the case may be. But it's important for you to note that the concept of human rights is a nebulous concept. It has different meanings. There are different scholars who have defined or have conceptualized, human rights based on their own perspective or based on their own background, as the case may be. However, on a general note, when we talk about human rights, we are referring to, privileges that an individual enjoy because he's human, right? There are privileges that you've got to enjoy because you are a human being. These privileges are human rights, right? But within the context of a state as a political entity or as a geopolitical entity, or within the context of the international system where you have state actors and non-state actors, where there are rules and regulations that govern, the conduct of states within the international system, it is important to view human rights as privileges that an individual enjoy because he is not just a human being, but because he is a legal member of a state, right? For instance, because I am a Nigerian, there are privileges that I enjoy. And these privileges cannot be enjoyed by people who are not citizens of Nigeria. Of course, you may want to call them aliens, right? There are a lot of foreigners or aliens in Nigeria, in different countries, but they cannot enjoy the privileges that citizens of those countries will enjoy. So these privileges that is peculiar for the enjoyment of citizens of a country is what we call human rights. But that's not to say that because one is an alien, he also does not enjoy certain kind of right. Of course, an alien will enjoy right to life. An alien will enjoy right to freedom of expression. An alien will enjoy right to freedom of association. However, an alien cannot enjoy the right to vote and be voted for in a country that's not his. An alien cannot enjoy the right to take political appointments in a country that's not his. An alien cannot, to a large extent, be enrolled into the military or the intelligence community of a country where he's not a citizen. So there are multi-dimensional, approaches in viewing the concept of human rights. Remember, in the first instance, I said there are privileges that an individual enjoys because he's a human being, right? However, within the context of a state, human rights are privileges that an individual enjoys because he's a legal member of a state, right? Having said that, human rights have different, types. There are rights that are political, there are rights that are economic, there are rights that are social, cultural. But before we go into looking at this taxonomy of human rights, it is important to look at, on a general note, examples of human rights. Every human being has the right to life. In fact, the right to life is an inalienable right. It's a right that is given by nature, given by God, and as such right should not be taken by him or by anybody else. And so right to life is one very important example of human rights. Right to freedom of expression, an important example of human rights. Right to freedom of religion and thought. Yeah, this is a very controversial right, especially with the ongoing manifestations of gender dimensions within the global system. For instance, we are seeing that within the global system, you have issues of LGBTQ, things like people who are transgender, people who are homosexual, and all of these is captured as part of their fundamental human rights. But however, because of the dynamism of the global system, because of the issues associated with culture, with tradition, there are certain parts of the global system that does not allow, such rights. And so what that tells you is that human rights is relative in time and in space. There are certain things that if you do them elsewhere, it is part of your human right, and so you enjoy it. But if you do the same thing in a different clime, you may be arrested because within such a clime, it is criminal for you to do certain kind of things. For instance, in Nigeria, LGBTQ is a crime, is an offense, and is punishable by law. Homosexuality is punishable by law. But in Europe, in America, and in some Western capitalist economy, is an issue of right. Right? So there's a right to freedom of religion and freedom of thought. There's a right to freedom of association. There's a right to be voted, to vote and be voted for, where the issue of franchise, comes in. There's the right to belong to any group of your choice. All of these are fundamental examples of human rights. If you like, right to education, right to basic infrastructural amenities, all of these constitute examples of human rights. But like I said, it is important to know that all of these examples put together can be classified into political rights, economic rights, and social cultural rights. Right to vote and be voted for is a political or civic right. Right to freedom of education, right to be employed, all of these falls under socio-economic right. Right to a religion, right to freedom of thought, right to freedom of association, all of these are also manifestations of certain kind, of rights. It is important to note that when rights are violated, that the citizen reserve the right to sue the government, an individual, or an organization that violates his right. But it's also important that some rights that we note, that some rights are justiciable and some rights are injusticiable. Right? So that you have rights to education doesn't mean that, for instance, you can sue your parents for not giving you education. This right is not justiciable. It doesn't mean that you can sue the government of your country, or in the case of Nigeria, sue the government of Nigeria for not providing your children with education. You can't do that because this right is not justiciable. Can I sue the federal government of Nigeria, for instance, for not guaranteeing my security? You can do that because it is not justiciable. And so it is important that as students of human rights and security, that we understand that yes, there are rights, but these rights, some are justiciable and some are not also justiciable. And it's also very important that we understand that there are limitations to your right as a citizen. Right? There are limitations. There are times where governments may put in place certain measures to limit your right because of national security interest. Right? For instance, in situations where you have conflict, you see sometimes the state comes to declare curfew, dusk-to-dawn curfew. People are not allowed to move because it is for the collective interest of the peace and stability of the state. However, ladies and gentlemen, we have looked at what human right is. We have also looked at some examples of human rights. We have also argued that some of these rights are justiciable and some are not justiciable. But remember, the subject is human rights and security. What is the nexus? We're trying to establish, we're trying to demystify, we have tried to conceptualize human rights. And so let's look at the concept of security now, right? The concept of security is a highly contested concept. It's a concept that you have multiplicities of scholarly opinion as to what constitutes security and what should not constitute security. Right? And so, as a student or as an expert in security, it is important that you look at security within two contexts, because the concept of security is dynamic. Where there's a metamorphosis of the concept of security. It is dynamic, it is transient because of the transient and dynamic nature of the international system and even the behavior of man. Right? Hence the concept of securitization. What that simply means is that security as a concept can be viewed from the traditional perspective and a modern perspective. The traditional perspective of security is what, of course, most people are familiar with. We view security as the ability of the state to guarantee the protection and safety of our citizens, the ability of the state to protect our territorial integrity and the lives and properties of our citizens. Yes, that's correct. Several scholars have defined security. Morgan, and so on and so forth have tried to conceptualize the concept of security from, this dimension. Looking at security as capacity, looking at security from a militaristic and a state-centric approach, looking at security in the context of elements of national power, in the context of the capacity, in the context of military might and strength. Yes, that's correct. However, the concept of security has metamorphosed. There's a new dimension, there's a modern dimension to the concept of security. This modern dimension synchronizes security with development and insecurity with underdevelopment. That's why, for instance, McNamara will argue that a state that is developed will experience less rate of insecurity, but a state that is underdeveloped will experience high rate of insecurity. And I've done an examination of the global system, and I tend to agree with McNamara that most advanced countries that are developed, most developing economies, enjoy high degree of security. And most less developed countries are grappling with serious security challenges. Look at Africa, for instance. We're talking about terrorism. We're talking about banditry, ethnic militias, right? Violent non-state actors who have made the continent of Africa unbearable, because of the rate of underdevelopment. That when people are underdeveloped, when there's a high level of poverty, high level of illiteracy, high level of unemployment, all of these can constitute in generating insecurity. Now, what that simply means is that poverty, unemployment, illiteracy, backwardness, poor leadership, bad governance are all precursors to insecurity. Right? So the modern notion of security differs from the traditional notion that looks at security in terms of capacity. The modern notion of security centers on human person and, of course, the relationship between development and security, or underdevelopment and insecurity, as the case may be. The like of Barry Buzzard, Ole Weaver, have contributed immensely in the discussion of securitization. Now, what that means is that what hitherto was not securitized, what hitherto was not viewed or seen as a security threat, is now being seen as a security threat. For instance, food security, an important component of the modern notion of security. All over the world, people are becoming food insecure. What is the quality of food that people eat? How affordable is food? All of these are manifestations of food insecurity. For instance, look at the conflict between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Gaza. People are dying of hunger. What that simply means is that they are food insecure. And food insecurity is a manifestation of the modern concept of security. Environmental security, economic security, political security, all of these are examples of the modern notion of security. And it is important that as expert in security or as expert in international security, you understand that the concept of security has a modern dimension and, of course, a traditional dimension. And the traditional dimension is related to the realist orientation and the Westphalia perspective of the state, where the state is seen as the major actor and the most important actor as far as security is concerned. The manifestations within the global system is gradually changing that narrative to, a narrative that shows that even some non-state actors are becoming more critical stakeholders, more critical drivers of insecurity, within the global system. Having said that, what then is the relationship between security and human rights, and human rights and security? These two phenomena are very important. More often than not, in conflict situation, you see states in an attempt to promote national security end up violating human rights. For instance, Nigeria has been accused severally, for violating human rights in our counter-terrorism operations. More often than not, in conflict situation, you see women and children becoming vulnerable, women becoming spoils of war, women being raped, women being kidnapped. Kidnapping is a violation of human rights. Rape is a violation of human rights. But sometimes you see that in conflict situations, these things are predominant. Women are kidnapped. Women are used as bargain. Women and civilians are used as blockade by terrorist organizations. And like I said, unfortunately, in some instances, states are even the ones violating rights in an attempt to guarantee national security, whether at the domestic or at the international level. Look at the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. A lot of innocent, unarmed civilians have been killed. In an attempt for Russia to promote her national interest, civilians have been killed. What about Israel and Gaza? In an attempt for Israel to decimate Hamas, uncountable number of civilians, women, children, who are not parties to the conflict are being killed. By implication, their rights are being violated. A lot of humanitarian crises, courtesy of Israel trying to promote our national interest. And so as students of international relations, you must understand that security and human rights are variables that go hand in hand. Security is a product of law. A state is a state because the state is recognized by international law, right? And even within the domestic level, a state is a state because the state has the backing of law. But human rights is also a product of law, just as the state is a product of law. And therefore, there must be a need for a balance between the state promoting security and violating human rights. All of these are very, very important. That's why today, in the discourse of international relations, we now talk about, for instance, international humanitarian law or rules of engagement in military operations, all as an attempt to ensure that yes, states have the locus, states have the legitimate right to go or to embark on war. However, though you have the legitimate right to embark on war, the war must be fought. The war must be executed within the confines of the law without violating human rights, right? The whole principles of jus ad bellum and jus in bello and the principle of pacta sunt servanda are manifestations of what we see within the global system. Yes, the legal backing to go for war, you have the justification for war, but the war must be fought within the confines of the law. And because the state is a signatory to several treaties that respects human rights, then the principle of pacta sunt servanda becomes important. That means states must ensure that they adhere to treaties that they have signed to, especially in relation to human rights, especially in relation to international humanitarian law, and so on and so forth. And so the nexus between security and human rights is a very important discourse as far as international politics is concerned, even as far as domestic policies is concerned. Sometimes in Nigeria and in some countries, we have seen states violating the rights of our citizens in the name of trying to promote security. I know some people with realist orientation will argue that the state should do everything possible to guarantee our national security, even when it has to do with violating human rights. These are realist orientations, but there's a liberal explanation also to the behavior of states within the global system. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what we have succeeded in doing in this short video is to look at the relationship between security and human rights. And we started by, first of all, conceptualizing human rights, conceptualizing security, and looking at, the various dimensions of security. Then, of course, we also try to look at the nexus or the relationship between human rights and security. And we did say that more often than not, human rights violation occurs in an atmosphere of insecurity. That sometimes, in an attempt to promote security, state and non-state actors end up violating human rights. And we did argue also that states have the justification for war, for instance, right, under the principles of jus ad bellum. But of course, it's also important that the principles of jus in bello and the principles of pacta sunt servanda plays a very important role. And there are rules of engagement in military operations. Civilians are supposed to be spared, non-combatants are not supposed to be victims of the actions of state, because this ends up as a violation not just of their rights, but a violation of international humanitarian law. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, and also ensure that your notification sign is open, so that as I upload more videos, you will get to know, and of course continue to follow. Also ensure that you share this link for others to also subscribe to. See you for now. It's bye.